So, hello, we're back with another interview for this year's World Cleanup Day on fashion and textile waste. And I'm so excited to have a true expert in the field who has a really incredible range of ideas, like how we should change and what could the solutions be for consumers, brands, producers, and so on. So, welcome, Luke, from Circ. I'm so excited to hear more about your story and the Circ story. Like, where did this idea come from in the first place, and how did you manage to actually create such a, pretty massive company out of it?
Thanks, Marilyn. It's actually quite funny because we were actually working in an entirely different industry, and we were actually an agri biotech company, and we developed a technology to extract valuable chemicals out of plants, and that was our actual focus. But the plant we were looking at was less attractive to the existing players. They wanted to use corn, they wanted to use soy to get these sugars, to get these oils out. There were also some market timing issues. Oil price came down dramatically. And so we had a technology, but it was not really something that the market particularly wanted, as it turned out, not at the time. And so we were looking at around at what else we could do. So we looked at could we take waste agri and turn it into valuable products? And then we came from there. We ended up, someone actually who we were dealing with around this said, have you ever tried processing textiles? And we hadn't, but we also were nervous because we thought, does anyone care? Because what we had built previously, we had a solution, but no market for it. In this case, we tested it. We got very positive results. In fact, so positive that we thought that someone else must already be doing this. And we reported the results back to people who we were dealing with. And we also said, hey, do people actually care? And I joke, sometimes it's better than having the solution is having the solution at the right time. And it just so happened that this was the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. The industry was waking up to this. The Ellen MacArthur report on how damaging fashion and textiles was had just come out. And so we very quickly got connected with people who were like, no, this is real. And when we were first introduced to Patagonia, in fact, when they called us to find out what we were doing, we realized that if people were calling us rather than us trying to chase people the whole time, there was probably something real here. And so we actually ended up transitioning the company completely into textiles and fashion and into recycling. And we were successful in raising funds to investment from the likes of Patagonia, from a Japanese conglomerate called Marubeni and a few others. And then we used that to build up and, start the journey to essentially where we are now. But yeah, we ended up in this industry as a fortuitous accident, basically.
Wow, isn't that usually or quite often the best way to get into something, When you actually get customers calling you and you realize like, oh, this could be an interesting path. I would really be interested to actually, I don't know if you can share it, maybe it's all confidential, but what is the main differentiator between your technology and perhaps something else what is in the market? Because to be honest, I personally don't know what else is in the market. I've just heard from brands that it's so difficult to do to actually recycle textiles.
So, where we differentiate, and just to be clear what exactly we do, we recycle blended textiles, specifically polyester and cotton blends, and return both the polyester and the cotton back into the textile supply chain. That is pretty much what makes us unique. There are people who are focused on pure cotton and the recycling of pure cotton. There are people who focused on the recycling of pure polyester. There are people focused on nylon. There are people who are now starting to look at blends, but where we stand out is we've been the only people to date to take polyester from polycotton, make that back into polyester for in the textile supply chain, make garments, and take the cotton, turn that into a cellulose pulp, and I'll get more into what that means, so we can make lyocell and viscose and take those back into the supply chain as well. So We stand in a different spot because we focus on blends and we're able to recover both pieces back into the textile supply chain. And I think it's worth noting here that that's something why into viscose and lyocell and those sorts of things, people don't realize that their clothes are made largely out of three things. In fact, all textiles, whether you sit on it, whether it's hanging on your windows, it's all made out of three main things. It's made out of oil in the form of polyester. It's made out of cotton, which is the second most dominant fiber. And then the third one is it's made out of trees, which people do not realize. You know, if you go to Scandinavia, if you go to places like that, people realize because that's where the trees are coming from. But to get something that had that more natural feel, that could absorb water, which polyester can't, you turn to making tree-based fiber. So you cut down the tree and you process it to get to this pure cellulose, which is one of the main materials in plants. And then you turn that into a fiber. Instead of using trees, we can take the waste cellulose that's in cotton, because cotton is actually a very pure form of this material, and we can take that and purify that and make that in, so we need less trees.
Mm. So is your input actually like you actually get the textile waste, so that's your input, and then the output, is this already like the fabric itself, or is it like just the fiber?
So we don't produce the fabric ourselves.
Mhm.
There are so one of the things we learned about the textile supply chain is just the incredible things that people do at the spinning stage, at the yarn stage, at the weaving stages, e- dyeing and finishing. It's incredible what people can do with the same fiber. And so we produce the inputs into these fiber and work with partners to make the fibers. So we produce lyocell with partners, some viscose is also in development, but it is polyester and lyocell predominantly that we focus on.
Okay, cool. So let's move forward with the big news that you recently announced with Circ, that you are actually opening a brand new facility in France. Could you share more around this, and also like, how were you able to scale? Did you have partnerships with different brands already? And this is how it actually, well, as you said, Patagonia called you. So maybe you can share a little bit more around the journey into France, the hub of fashion, and how this path exactly happened.
So the way we ended up in France, I'll get to in a minute, but I think the key thing for us was identifying partners, finding partners, building a coalition. Textiles is one of the oldest industries that we have ever had as a species. We have worn clothes for a long time. It was the root of the Industrial Revolution. And in fact, so many of the wealthiest cities at times in the world have been around textiles and textile production. And so shifting such a massive industry, which, I mean, people just don't understand how big we're talking, yeah, requires building alliances, building collaborations. And so we've been building relationships with brands, definitely, because they're the they're the users of the fabric and produce the garments. We need to build awareness even with the customers so that they're aware of the profile of their clothes and things. We've also been building a coalition as well with the supply chain, the people who make the fiber, who make the fabric, who make the garments. Because when we started, we were making all of these things. So I produce the chemicals that make polyester. I produce the cellulose that goes into lyocell. If I go to a brand and I show them vials of powder or, fluffy pulp, they're like, okay, and what is this? So one of the things we had to do was figure out how to delight our customers' customers. So this is where working with brands to not just for investment, but to show customers and the industry the art of what's possible. So producing beautiful garments And that requires deep partnerships throughout the supply chain. And so those collaborations were key. But then when you're transforming an industry and you're building something new, government support is actually very important and powerful. And in France, we found that support. So we actually looked across the world at sites, and there are lots of great sites and places that we could, put these facilities. France has some really strong advantages, but they also had a desire, a willingness to push the boundaries of circularity, to push towards the circular economy. And so, from a regulatory perspective, from an incentive perspective, but also they had industrial hubs, they had the logistics, they have power, they have all of these things, the skilled labor force, they all combine to make this an attractive place to be. And so we've really strongly felt the support from France. And so we've identified a great site. We are doing all the development work. We're working on the engineering, and yes, we will be building a site in France.
So can you already reveal when the factory would actually be ready for functioning?
So that's the other thing that I think surprised a lot of people in the textile industry, or not in the textile industry. The supply chain completely gets it. A lot of the brands, I think, were a bit shocked when we were like, we're going to have to build a very large facility. There's all the engineering, the permitting, the actual construction time. So I would love to say it's sooner, but it's going to be operational at this stage in 2028. I would love to be able to wave a wand and just be able to build these facilities and have them operating sooner, especially since, frankly, time is not on our side with a lot of the climate effects we're seeing. But yes, that is the timing that we're looking at.
Very good. Um, you actually gave me a very good leeway into the governmental action and legislation. And also my one of my questions was actually which would be, in your opinion, the most forward-thinking countries, and you sort of gave me the answer already for this. But I'm wondering, because you are really in this industry, have you seen, apart from what just France, has been implementing, have you seen any true legislation changes, what could actually really change the fashion and textile environment, not just in France, but also in other countries or globally?
So we're seeing the shift globally. If you think about it, France was ahead of the curve. They've had an EPR scheme since 2012 for textiles. They're reworking it. There are always challenges, especially if you go first. You learn all the challenges, and everyone gets to learn from, anything that you learn. But Europe is starting to head towards uh, zero waste from and zero landfill of textiles, not destruction of usable clothes. You're seeing EPR schemes. You're seeing recycled content mandates. You're seeing requirements about durability of products. Also, even around the information around your products, so that products have a unique passport, so you know more information about them. You know where they're made, what they're made with, which helps with recycling, with end of life for these things. You also have a scenario where, so that's France and it's Europe. I would say one of the other countries that was very strong in doing this is the Netherlands, is one of the other leading lights in Europe. The UK is starting to really look at this regulation. I'm sure there are others that I'm forgetting, but the other one, which I think would surprise a lot of people, is the US. And that is because it may not be US wide, but California by itself is the fifth largest economy in the world. And this regulation is starting to come into places like California. So they're putting in EPR, extended producer responsibility requirements on textiles. So now the producers of textiles, the producers of garments are going to be responsible for the life of those. And so when they start making a shift, they have a very significant influence on the entire US economy because You only need a few states to tip that are big markets, and then you have a situation where it doesn't make sense for a national brand to try and do one thing for California and one thing for somewhere else. So then it starts to standardize the legislation even though it isn't federal regulation. So I think that for me is a bright move. I think we're starting to see the same thing actually coming out of China and India as well. We're starting to see very much moves there. I mean, India has just put in a recycled content mandate for their plastic bottles and for their packaging, which means that you can't make all of your recycled polyester clothes. So polyester, they say it's got recycled polyester in clothes, they mean it's made from plastic bottles. Now they can't make it from plastic bottles because those bottles are being rerouted to bottles. And so there's a need and a growing interest in textile to textile recycling. So I would say I see green shoots and growth and development in regulation globally actually around a lot of this.
This is really good news for all of us, especially when you know what's going on because we are not following all the legislation around the issue, but it's really good to hear it from you. And actually, I would love to let's pretend that you have a magic wand and you could actually implement any global policy from 1st of January 2026. What would it be?
Any policy. There are several things that need to work together. I think if we recognize the true cost of some of our virgin resources, so we balance the playing field between recycled and recovered materials, that would be probably the biggest thing. Because right now we have created situations where we don't recognize the true cost of things. And so it seems much cheaper and easier to just mass extract resources from the earth and do everything with virgin. And I don't think we're counting the true cost. So if there was some way to recognize the true cost of our consumption, I think that would be a good start.
Nice, nice. Let's make that happen. So let's move on from the governments and legislation to also consumers. I know this is not your direct kind of customer. Your customers are, suppliers and the producers and then kind of the brands. But I would just really like to hear your perspective in terms of what have you seen is changing in the behavior of fashion consumers? And is there also kind of, is there a place for hope for some sort of global transformation in the way people are starting to buy things or, perhaps respecting things more, what we just discussed before we had this interview and so on. Like, what do you see actually happening in the world in terms of consuming fashion and textiles?
So I'm going to start with the negative, unfortunately.
Go on, go on.
And that is negative from one aspect, positive from another. One thing we are seeing is a lot more people coming out of poverty and people moving into the middle class. This has been a macro trend for a while. The population is also growing. So with that, you have more people who want to be able to buy things. And let's be honest, why do we buy clothes? Is because it's a personal branding thing. It's the cover of our book. And so it's what we show to the world as part of who we are. Telling people that are now getting disposable income that they can't buy clothes, I don't think is going to work. So I think for a while, textile consumption is unfortunately going to keep going up. We're not going to be solving this problem in the near term by reducing consumption at a global level. I would love to say that we are, but I don't see it happening. I think we need to find solutions that help mitigate how polluting this industry is in the near term. Long term, I think the biggest thing we need to do is we need to learn to love our clothes again. We have changed our attitude to clothes over the last few decades. We've been trained to consume and trained to buy. And because you are trained to, the only way to get people to constantly buy things is if the things that they currently have are no longer worthwhile, no longer have worth. So we've started to be trained to think of our clothes as disposable, something we just throw away. So I would love to see more people thinking consciously about this. I see in certain parts of the world, and I see with younger generations, people who are starting to think about clothes differently. But ironically, it's people who have the luxury of time and money who tend to be most conscious about this. We talk about how some segments are buying more consciously, more sustainably. But then you have Shein and Temu who exploded onto the market and were the most downloaded apps in Europe, in the US, and managed to capture a share of the market that no one even knew existed. And that is ultra fast fashion. And people buy those clothes and they have a cheap monetary value. And so they're not seen as having any value. when you can pay less for a t-shirt than a cup of coffee, you're not going to look at that t-shirt as valuable. It's just the way it is. There's no embedded value in your mind. And no one
Exactly.
stops to think either about why is your t-shirt less than a cup of coffee when the
Exactly.
production that goes into that, the materials that go into that are so, are so much.
True. And I think that was always my question when I saw those t-shirts, which cost like, 2.99, 3.99. Like when you actually start kind of taking it apart, that cost, it's just a fraction for each, to the actual person who sewed it together, to the actual, the resources, the material. Like, how can it be? How is it even possible that it's so cheap? It's just not possible, right? So that was always my question. And I think that's true. Like, because when we pay so little for it, it actually we lose respect because it is like, we drink the coffee. We don't think about that cup of coffee like for the next 2 weeks or something. It was just like this dopamine hit in some reason, like in some ways. And that's the way I see it. It's the same thing with clothes as well. It's like you just get this dopamine hit of like buying something and then consuming and then it's gone. You don't think about it anymore, even in a couple of days.
Well, you think about if you associate monetary value with the value of everything, then a £3 t-shirt is, a triviality for most developed world economies. Like your bus ticket may have cost you more,
Mhm.
your train ticket cost you more. So you start to look at we as human beings look at things as relative value.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying we need to suddenly make the clothes, each t-shirt is $100 or €100 or £100, but again, it goes to that thing about not recognizing the actual cost of something and only recognizing the price of something and not recognizing what the costs were to get the price to that point, socioeconomically and from a resource like pillaging the planet perspective.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly that. So why don't we move back to Circ? And actually, I have two last questions for you around this because we talked about, the beginning of Circ and how you pivoted along the way, understanding where your true path lies, so to say. And could you identify actually what has been your biggest challenge in your eyes? Because you have been there for a long time. Like, what was there anything what was really challenging?
There are innumerable challenges. There are so many challenges as you start to try and transform a big industry and you try and build a company where you're the outsider. I think there's been a major market shift and a change in sentiment and feeling from people are starting to recognize the cost of clothing and fashion and things like this from an environmental perspective. So that's been something that's been helpful. I think challenges wise, it's always incredibly difficult to bring a new technology to market because you need those early adopters. You need the champions who are going to invest, even though they are doing something that will benefit all of their competitors in a way. If you think about the solar industry or the electric car industry, it's that point where you have champions who will allow you to start production so that you can optimize your business and bring it down to cheaper and cheaper price. I mean, if no one had invested in solar 20 years ago, when it was still something that was developing, we wouldn't be at the point now where solar produces some of the cheapest energy and cleanest energy that we've seen. Same with wind, same with electric vehicles. If it's about finding those champions, finding partners who are willing to commit and push through, even when you are starting something new. Those ones willing to take the pioneers, the champions who are willing to lead. I think that's always a challenge is finding those people and getting them on board.
Yes, I definitely know it. Having been in the startup ecosystem as well, that is that is a true challenge to actually connect with the right people, with the right partners, and so on. And you gave me the exact word for the last question, pioneers. I actually really wanted to ask you, what would be your word of advice for people, teams who are looking at the fashion and textile industry and thinking, okay, we want to change something. We want to be the new pioneers, go into the next frontiers, and they don't know exactly how to start or what would be the key in order to do that. Like, what would be your kind of advice having been through this process with Circ?
So I would say if you are looking to change things, there are three questions you need to ask yourself. One is the can we? Is this technologically possible? And answering that question is not always easy because it's You sometimes have to put in a fair amount of work to figure out if something can work. Should we is where you need to think, is what I'm proposing going to actually be better for the world, better for the planet, better for the people involved? Less chemical use, less energy use, more fair wages, something that adds that you're sure that your benefit is better than what's currently there. That's the should we do this part of the equation. The will it get done, unfortunately, comes down to you need to take a long, hard look and say, is there a way I can get to the point where this makes money? That I can get people who will pay for this and that there's a pathway to being able to get enough customers that this can scale. The other thing that I would say to people is a lot of people are worried about how big an impact. We focused, I mean, and we're guilty of this. Our founding principles were a lot of like, if you're going to go after a challenge, and you're going to solve a problem, solve a big problem. But there are lots of problems out there that need to be solved that may not be that big. I think I would say to anyone, if you are looking to change things, it's because you are looking for a life of purpose. You're looking for a purpose-driven thing to do. And while it will be hard, and while it will be challenging, and while it will be disheartening at times, go and do it because you will find a lot of joy and contentment in it as well. Purpose is a great motivator. The other thing that I would very much advise any new person moving into the space is reach out. There are other people who share your ideas, your values. It's a very purpose-driven companies tend to be very collaborative. People are looking to help you do something and make a better world. So find that network of people, reach out, connect, ask for help. And sometimes it's just ask for support, sometimes it's just being able to pick up the phone, having a like-minded group of people where you can be like, things are not going well. I'm having a terrible week. I'm having a terrible month. And you have people who help inspire you and pull you through. So find your tribe and go and solve that problem.
Thank you so much. These were the golden words, truly. And this is so aligned with what Let's Do It is about as well, because we built the network in now in 164 countries. And this is our biggest asset. That actually we have people on the ground all over the world who, we go to Singapore, we go to Vietnam, we go to America, we go anywhere, and there are people there who are actually, working with their purpose, we're really like dedicated to making the world and the earth a better place to live for all of us. So thank you so much for this. It's a golden word for all the entrepreneurs out there as well. Thank you so much, Luke, for this beautiful interview. And yeah, good luck. We're all waiting for the Circ big facility to open in France very soon.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your time.